Someone you love stops breathing, the fire crackles, the night is cold. And now you are holding a problem that no animal before you ever truly faced. The body is still here. The face is still the face you knew this morning. But the person is gone, and what is left will not stay the same for long. So what do? You cannot simply walk away the way a deer leaves its fallen. Something in you refuses. This was your mother, your child, your friend. And yet you cannot keep them either, because within days the body will change, will draw flies and scavengers, will become a danger to everyone still living. This is the moment our ancestors faced over and over for hundreds of thousands of years. The first creatures on earth who looked at their own dead and felt that something was wrong, the first to grieve, the first to wonder where the person had gone, and the first who had to decide with their bare hands what to do with what remained. Their answers are some of the strangest, most haunting things we have ever dug up. Bodies curled like sleepers and sprinkled with red dust, skulls kept and shaped into faces. Whole families lowered into deep dark shafts, bones cleaned, painted, and carried for years. And in every one of them, the same quiet message reaching across the ages. We cared. So come back with me to the oldest grief in the world, to the firelight and the cold ground and the unbearable ordinary loss. This is how the first humans faced the one thing none of us escape. This is what ancient humans did with their dead. Start with what makes this such a deeply human story. Most animals do not bury anything. When a wild creature dies, its body is simply left where it falls. The herd moves on. The pack scatters. Nature takes the rest, quickly and without ceremony. For almost every species on Earth, death is just an ending, and the body is just meat. But somewhere in our long story, that stopped being enough for us. We are not the only animals who notice death, that much is clear. Elephants will stand over their fallen and touch the bones for hours. Some apes carry a dead infant for days, unable to set it down. There are even reports of magpies laying blades of grass beside a fallen companion, and of dolphins holding a dead calf at the surface for days, refusing to let it sink. We should be careful not to read too much into these moments, but they hint that the ache of loss did not begin with us. It was waiting in the world before we arrived. So the seed of grief runs deeper than humans alone. The feeling is old. But what our ancestors did with that feeling is something no other animal has ever done. They did not just notice death. They answered it. They acted on it. They took the body and did something deliberate, careful, and meaningful with it. And that simple shift may be one of the truest marks of becoming human. The day a creature first decided that a dead body deserved more than to be abandoned, that it should be placed, or covered, or kept, or honored, something brand new arrived in the world, a mind that could not let the dead just be gone. Because to bury someone on purpose, you have to do something extraordinary in your head. You have to understand that you, too, will one day be the body on the ground. You have to feel that this person still matters even though they can no longer help you. You have to hold somehow the idea that they have gone somewhere even if you cannot say where. So when we dig up an ancient grave, we are not just finding old bones. We are finding the fingerprints of the first minds that thought about death the way we do. The first beings who looked at a corpse and saw not garbage, but someone. And the oldest of those fingerprints take us back further than almost anyone expects. Deep in a cave in South Africa lies one of the strangest discoveries in all of science. To reach it, you crawl through passages so tight that only the smallest people can fit. Down and down, through a crack barely wider than a human body, into a hidden chamber in total darkness, far from any daylight. And there, on the floor of that buried room, lay the bones of many bodies. They belonged to an ancient human cousin with a small brain, no bigger than an ape's. And yet here they were, deep inside a cave system that is brutally hard to reach. Bodies of men, women, and children gathered together in one deep, dark place. The scientists who found them dared to ask a question that started a storm. Did this small-brained creature carry its dead on purpose into the deep? Because there seems to be no other easy way for all those bodies to end up down there. No clear sign they were dragged in by a river. No clear sign a predator stashed them. Just bodies in a hidden chamber, reachable only by a long and deliberate journey in the dark. If that is true, and the debate is fierce, it changes the whole story. It would mean that caring for the dead is not some recent, big-brained idea. It would mean a creature with a brain a third the size of ours, hundreds of thousands of years ago, was already carrying its loved ones into the earth. Not everyone agrees, and that is exactly how science should work. Some argue the bodies fell in, or were washed in, or arrived some other way we have not guessed. But the very fact that experts are fighting over it tells you how big the stakes are. The roots of grief may run far, far deeper than we ever imagined. What makes the find so important is not just the bodies, but the journey to reach them. Getting into that chamber means a long crawl through pitch black stone in places so narrow your shoulders scrape both walls at once, with no light and no easy way back. Nobody ends up down there by accident. Every trip in was a choice, made in the dark. And whether or not those particular bones were placed with care, one thing is now beyond doubt from sites all across the ancient world. By 100,000 years ago, our ancestors and their close cousins were absolutely, unmistakably burying their dead on purpose. Walk into the oldest clear graves we know, and the first thing you notice is the pose. The bodies are not thrown in. They are arranged, laid out with evident care. Many are curled up on their side, knees drawn toward the chest, in the exact position of a person fast asleep, as if death were only a long rest. Some of the oldest, deliberate burials we have found, well over 100,000 years old, come from caves in the Middle East, and they take your breath away. A grown person and a child lay down together, a body with his hands placed just so, and in one grave, a pair of antlers cradled in the dead person's arms. Think about what that means. Somebody chose to place those antlers there. They were not needed. They served no use to a body that would never move again. Someone, grieving, decided that this person should not go into the ground empty-handed. That is not survival. That is love, reaching across the line of death. The Neanderthals, our close cousins, did this too, and the evidence is striking. At several sites, their dead were placed in shallow pits, curled and deliberate. At one famous cave, a man who had survived terrible injuries for years, blind in one eye, with a withered arm, was laid carefully to rest by his people. And that detail matters more than almost any object in the grave. To live for years, with one good arm and one eye, on the harsh Ice Age plain, you would need help. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone valued him long after he could hunt. And when he died, that same band did not abandon him. They buried him. And it was not only adults who were given this care. Some of the most moving graves are the smallest. Infants and young children laid down as gently as any elder, sometimes with tiny ornaments, sometimes wrapped and cradled in a way that still aches to look at across the ages. A child who could do nothing for the group was still mourned, still buried, still loved. So the picture from these ancient graves is gentle and unmistakable. The dead were treated as sleepers, not as garbage, curled, arranged, sometimes held, placed in the ground with the same tenderness you would use to settle a child for the night. The first humans did not just dispose of their dead, they put them to rest. Now we come to one detail that appears again and again across the ancient world, the color red. Open grave after grave on continents far apart, separated by tens of thousands of years, and you keep finding the same thing. The bones are stained red, dusted, sprinkled, sometimes packed in a deep blood red powder. It is one of the most haunting patterns in all of human prehistory. The powder is red ochre, a natural earth pigment, ground from iron-rich stone. Our ancestors mined it, carried it, and ground it into a vivid rusty red dust. And over, when they buried someone, they covered the body in it. Some graves hold so much ochre that the soil itself is dyed the color of dry blood. Why? We cannot ask them, so we have to think carefully. Red is the color of blood, and blood is the color of life itself. It is hard not to imagine that the red dust was meant to give something back to the dead. A symbol of life, perhaps, poured over a body from which life had drained away. Remember the burials at Sungir, the ones covered in thousands of ivory beads? Those bodies were also laid on a bed of red ochre, soaked in it from head to foot. This was not a quick goodbye. This was a ritual, planned and rich and deliberate, pouring labor and color and meaning into the sending off of the dead. And here is what the ochre really proves, beyond any single meaning. It proves the burial was symbolic. It was about an idea, not just a body. You do not grind and sprinkle a special red powder over your dead for cleanliness. You do it because, in your mind, this death means something that has to be marked. So across the deep past, the same silent ceremony plays out again and again. A body curled like a sleeper, a grave dug with care, and the red dust falling. The color of life given to the dead by people who could not bear to let them go cold and gray. It is the oldest funeral we know, and at its heart is a color. Here is something that surprises people. Not every ancient culture put the dead away in the ground. For many of our ancestors, burial was only the beginning, not the end. The dead were not meant to vanish. They were meant to stay part of the living world. And so people found ways to keep them close, sometimes in ways that unsettle us today. In some ancient villages, the dead were buried right beneath the floor of the home. Families lived, cooked, and slept directly above their own ancestors, the bones of grandparents resting just under the feet of the grandchildren. Death was not sent away to a distant graveyard. It lived in the house. At one of the most famous early towns, in ancient Turkey, people did something even more striking. They kept the skulls. After a body had decayed, they would return, lift out the skull, and bring it back into the world of the living. Some skulls were carried, kept, and honored. In some cultures, people went further still and packed the skull with soft plaster, rebuilding the face of the dead, setting shells in for the eyes until it almost looked alive. Imagine holding the remade face of your grandmother years after her death. Her skull beneath your hands, her features sculpted back on, her eyes shining with shell. To us, that may sound eerie. To them, it was tender, a way of keeping her near, of refusing to let the dead become strangers, of holding the family whole across death. This is one of the deepest truths about how humans handle death. For huge stretches of our history, the dead were not gone. They were ancestors, present, watched over, talked to, and kept close, woven into daily life. The line between the living and the dead was not a wall. It was a doorway, often crossed. So the ancient answer to death was not only to bury and walk away, it was, just as often, to keep, to hold on, to carry the dead forward with you, beneath your floor, in your hands, in the rebuilt face of someone you loved. The dead stayed close because the living could not bear to let them leave. Burial was never the only road. Across the world, humans found many ways to send off the dead. Some of the oldest evidence we have is not of burial at all, but of fire. In Australia, by an ancient dry lake bed, lie the remains of a woman who died around 40,000 years ago, and her body had been cremated, burned, then the bones broken up and burned again, then carefully buried. It is one of the earliest cremations on Earth, a whole ritual of fire, tens of thousands of years old. Fire became one of the great roads for the dead, all over the world. To burn a body is to transform it, to turn flesh into smoke and ash that rises. For many peoples, that rising smoke was the spirit itself, lifting up and away, carried into the sky, set free from the body that had held it. Other cultures chose the open air instead of the ground or the flame. They laid their dead high on platforms or on mountainsides or out on the open rocks and let the sky and the birds and the weather slowly carry the body away, what looks harsh to us was, to them, a gift, returning the dead to the natural world. And some peoples did the most startling thing of all and took a little of their dead into themselves. In a few cultures, mourners would consume a small part of a loved one's body, not out of hunger or cruelty, but out of grief and respect. It was a way of keeping the person inside the family, quite literally, of carrying their strength and their memory on in the bodies of those who lived. And nearly all of these roads came with the same companions, a few treasured objects, a favorite tool, a string of beads, a handful of food tucked in beside the body. Whether the dead went into earth or fire or open sky, they rarely went empty-handed. Someone always thought to send them off with something for the journey ahead. So there was never one human way of death. There were dozens, hundreds, countless. Earth, fire, sky, water, and even the body itself, each a different road for the dead. But underneath every one of them runs the very same impulse, old as our species. The refusal to let the dead be nothing. The need to send them off the right way. So step back and ask the deepest question. Why? Why do this at all? No animal needs a funeral. A body left alone returns to the earth on its own. Burying, burning, decorating, keeping the dead, all of it costs precious time and effort. It does nothing to fill a belly or fight off the cold. And yet we have done it in every culture, on every continent, for as long as we have been us. The first answer is grief, plain and simple. We loved them. When you have shared your fire and your food and your whole life with someone, you cannot treat their body as meat the moment their heart stops. The hands that held you do not become garbage. They were, and somehow still are, them. The second answer is the great human question that death forces on us. Where did they go? The body is here, but the person, the laughter, the voice is gone. And almost everywhere, humans answered that they had gone somewhere else. The grave goods, the ochre, the rising smoke, all whisper of a journey, a next place. That is why we find tools and food and beads laid beside the dead. People were packing them for a voyage, sending them off with what they would need. You do not give a body a meal unless somewhere in your heart you believe there is still a someone there who might one day be hungry. And the third answer is the living. A funeral is for the ones left behind. It is how a group grieves together, marks the loss, and goes on without falling apart. It says the dead mattered, and so the living matter, and the band endures. Death tries to tear the group apart, and the funeral stitches it back together. So when an ancient human knelt to bury a friend in red dust 100,000 years ago, they were doing the same thing you do at a funeral today. Saying goodbye, asking where they went, holding the living together in the dark. The clothes have changed, the words have changed, the need has not changed at all. Across 100,000 years, the candle and the headstone replaced the ochre and the antlers, but the trembling hand that places them is the very same hand. We are still that grieving creature by the fire, unwilling to simply walk away. Some things about being human are older than language itself, and this is one of them. So, what did ancient humans do with their dead? They buried them curled like sleepers and dusted them in the red of life. They kept their skulls and rebuilt their faces and laid them beneath the floor. They burned them into rising smoke, gave them to the sky, and packed them for the journey on. They did, in 1,000 different ways, the one thing no other animal does. They cared. Every grave is a message with no words sent across 100,000 years. It says we love them. It says we wonder where they went. It says that even at the very edge of the unknown, in the cold and the dark, the first humans refused to let their dead simply disappear. Next time, we are staying in this ancient world, but turning back to the living and the strange. Because if they could face death with this much care and ceremony, what about the long, dark hours in between, with no lamps and no walls against the night? What on earth did ancient humans do all through the night? Thanks for spending this time in the deep past with me. If this made you feel a little closer to people who lived 100,000 years ago, subscribe, and stay a while. There is a whole ancient world out there, badly drawn and waiting for you. This was Grug.